for a little while, we have really truly been blessed by this building that God and through another person has given us. We wanted to be downtown. It's the perfect location for the outreach that we're doing. We're kind of starting to expand beyond it or grow out of it, but it's really been very conducive to our ministry. And I love personally the historical character of this building. It's pretty cool, 102 years old. And yet I know that our ministry is, functionality is also very important. And so we're hoping to do a little bit of updating in a way that might make some things more functional this winter. And the hope is that before the end of the year we might be able to raise enough money to do a project over the course of the winter. So what do we want to do? Well, pretty much from where I am all the way to the front entrance, we're hoping to redo the flooring. And if you've noticed, a couple of you have spilled coffee on the carpet. And I don't know how old this carpet is, but it's pretty bad. And we have some hopes, actually, of when you walk in that very first door, of making it feel a little bit like a lighthouse when you walk in. And then redoing the floor out in the other narthex entryway area out here. And then this floor and this hardwood is really taking a beating, and it's kind of wearing out. So we're hoping to kind of redo the floor and to carpet in here as well. And you may have some anxiety about that or opinions, but I think we're feeling like for functional purposes and cost effectiveness, that's the best route for us to go. What the plan is to slope the floor, the entire floor, just like this aisle and that aisle is sloped. So where, if you're sitting where there's kind of a ridge, those would be taken out and it would be all sloped. And then we're hoping to, or planning to remove the pews, which I know are kind of cool historically, but they are also wearing out. And they were made for skinny butts, and we don't all have skinny butts. And the leg room, if you're in the back, it's like, better than a first-class jet ride. If you're in the front, you're sitting like this. So, we're just hoping to even that out and make it more comfortable. One of the cool things, if you like the historical character of the pews, Bonanzaville is interested in them for their new church and maybe some other things. So that's kind of exciting. So if you really, really, really like them, you could go and sit in them almost any day of the week if you wanted to. The hope is to purchase some chairs similar to the one that I have before you up here. And at the end of the service, I'll put it down so you can sit in it. More comfortable, a little more spacious, a little wider. And we think that some of those updates will really be helpful for our ministry. One other thing that we do hope to do eventually, and it may not be the first phase, is that used to be pipes from a pipe organ behind the band. And that's pretty much empty now, so we hope to kind of expand the band area. That we might be able to do more on our own. This stuff we would not be able to do so much on our own. So we're hoping to raise money by the end of the year, and if we raise enough, we would try to proceed with this project. We think that we would need about $50,000 to do what I just described. For some of you, that sounds like a lot of money. For others of you, that may not seem like that much money. Here's the key to anything like this, especially if you're new to the church. Any project like this, the way that you make it work is everybody participates. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that next week, but my hope is that everybody participates according to their means. For some of you, that might be buying a chair, which would be about $40. Some of you, $40 would be a real stretch. Maybe there's a number of you who want to buy a chair together. It's all according to your means. Some of us can write much bigger checks and contribute on a much larger scale to the project. And that's where God has blessed us all differently, and so we respond accordingly. And so I just kind of wanted to bring that up to you today and let you know that We'll talk a little bit about it more next week. Here's the key, and I just really want to be real clear about this, is that we're talking about giving to this over and above what we normally give to the church. That's what's most important. It doesn't make any sense for us to redo the floor and redo chairs if we can't afford to pay the heat or the programs or the staff, to make the ministry go. So, that's number one. So if you can't do any more than what you're doing, that we just want you to continue that and thank you for that. So over these next few weeks, maybe you can be praying about that. I do want you to know that I always take stewardship seriously. How we manage and spend money that you earn hard and you invest into the ministry of this church. We take that very seriously. And it feels like the right time to do this. From my past experience, one of the coolest experiences of doing something like this is not the project, it's that everybody participated. Everybody feels like, I helped do that. I bought that chair. And so that's kind of what we're going to be working on these next few weeks. Well, this morning, now to the message. This morning I want to do something a little different. And so if you are visiting us today, if you've never been here before, you're going to have to come back for a normal message. I'm not sure what that looks like, but a normal message some other day. For years, in the month of November, I have taught on gratitude and stewardship. And I am going to kind of talk a little bit about gratitude and stewardship today and next week. But instead of kind of just doing a normal teaching on those topics, like I've normally done at this time of year, I'm going to share a little bit more about what's going on in my heart right now. That's kind of something that I've been learning to do a little bit more regularly. I believe that I have a spiritual gift of stewardship. Years ago, I even started writing a book that, yes, remains unfinished, specifically on the stewardship of money, and not just giving, but on saving and investing and all those kinds of things, taking care of everything that God has entrusted to us. I just want to say, that God has truly blessed my family over the years, and we have grown in our own generosity. We've been blessed with a good household income for many, many years in our marriage. And it's fluctuated, especially when I've gone through the things that brought me to Lighthouse. But God has really blessed us. And over the years, we have always tithed or more on that income that God has given us to our church. And it's interesting because I just kind of throw this out. Sometimes I've wondered if we've been blessed with a good household income because we've developed a generous heart. I suspect that that's true. At least that's what the Bible teaches. And I've grown in just loving to give, honestly. That said, what God has been doing in me is kind of a new thing, especially as it comes to my perspective on stewarding the many blessings of God. In my own brokenness and in my recovery, God has begun to reshape my heart. And I've been learning to see things and to see people and to see life differently than I used to. Now, the older I get, the more that I'm learning to simply share with you what I believe that God is doing in my life and what I see God doing in the faith community, and I hope that you can take something from it. This last week, I've been reading through the Old Testament now for a long time, because I read one chapter a day. And I've been in the book of Isaiah, so I started quite a while ago. And this week I read from Isaiah 58, and I'm going to ask you to turn there. It's page 613 in our church Bibles, if that's what you're using. Isaiah 58, page 613, and if you're using a Recovery Bible, it's page 912. And I'm wondering if you've ever had this experience where you read something and you had this overwhelming sense that God just like chose that for you to read that day. And I had this, I was reading the devotion as I was thinking about just a million things this week, like the election, and people, and chairs, and the floor, and family, and all these things kind of going on in my head. And also what I wanted to share with you today. And I read these words, and they just spoke to me, and I'll be kind of telling you why this morning. So let me read a little bit. Shout with the voice of a trumpet blast. Shout aloud. Don't be timid. So it's kind of a call to worship. Shout to God. Tell my people Israel of their sins. Oh, that's a little different. Yet they act so pious. They come to the temple every day and seem delighted to learn all about me. They act like a righteous nation that would never abandon the laws of its God. They ask me to take action on their behalf, pretending that they want to be near me. In other words, they're a little hypocritical. Have you ever felt that way yourself? Like I'm trying to act religious, but it's maybe, not really from the heart. We have fasted, verse 3, we have fasted before you, they say. Why aren't you impressed? We have been very hard on ourselves and you don't even notice it. I will tell you why, I respond. It's because you are fasting to please yourselves even while you fast. You keep oppressing your workers. What good is fasting when you keep on fighting and quarreling? This kind of fasting will never get you anywhere with me. You humble yourselves by going through the motions of penance, bowing your heads like reeds bending in the wind. You dress up in burlap, you cover yourselves with ashes. Is this what you call fasting? Do you really think that will please the Lord? No, this is the kind of fasting I want. Free those who are wrongly imprisoned. Lighten the burden of those who work for you. Let the oppressed go free. And remove the chains that bind people. Some of you here today feel like you're chained in some way, that something has bound you in your life. Share your food with the hungry and give shelter to the homeless. Give clothes to those who need them, and do not hide from relatives who need your help. That's an interesting verse when you think about it. Then your salvation will come like the dawn, and your wounds will quickly heal. Your godliness will lead you forward, and the glory of the Lord will protect you from behind. Then when you call, the Lord will answer. Yes, I am here, he will quickly reply. Remove the heavy yoke of oppression. Stop pointing your finger and spreading vicious rumors. Feed the hungry and help those in trouble. Then your light will shine out from the darkness, and the darkness around you will be as bright as noon. The Lord will guide you continually, giving you water when you are dry and restoring your strength. You will be like a well-watered garden, like an ever-flowing spring. I sensed God telling me in my morning devotions the other day. I was reading that, and I was thinking about all these things. I was thinking about the election and my little vote in the election. I was thinking about world events, and then I was thinking about all the people that I've been kind of encountering during the ministry here at Lighthouse, and I was thinking about chairs, and I was thinking about this project and raising funds for this project, and I had this sense that God was speaking to me in that passage, saying to me that, Dale, it's not about the chairs, it's about the people I'm going to put in the chairs. That's what I heard God say. And I had this overwhelming sense of gratitude that God had been out ahead of me and out ahead of us and had put these chairs here for us at this point. And I had this sense that God was telling me that it's not about the church thing. It's not about chairs and floor and comfort. It's about people. It's about individuals. And, so I kind of had a humbling in that way this week. And these words from God, they kind of overwhelmed me with God's love for the broken and the brokenhearted. And I was filled with gratitude for how God is using me and my experience and your experience for His kingdom here. And I thought a little bit about how I get to see God changing lives every day. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that later, but I get to see it every day. And I was so grateful that God is doing what He's doing here. And that it's not about chairs. It's not even about a building or the church thing. It's about lives. That's what God cares about, and how we're helping lives. And I just want to remind you, because some of you don't know much of my story. This is from a guy who not very many years ago was walking away from the ministry, and who was that far from walking away from the faith because of the dark path that I had traveled. And God has redeemed my struggles, and God redeems our struggles. In my brokenness, I'm learning to see things much differently than I used to. I'm learning to see people differently. So in some ways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of a travelogue through my week this morning, okay? But first we have a question. If you've not been here before, we ask a question every week. You have a chance to answer it. Ray, this is when I need you up here. Mics are over here. And if you've not been here, you can answer this question. You just need to get one of these handsome gentlemen's attention, and they will bring a microphone over to you. You need to stand up, speak directly into the mic. Give us a brief answer, because we hope that a few people will be able to share with us today. What way has God been changing your attitude about life or your relationship with Him lately? In what way has God been changing your attitude about life or your relationship with Him?
Hi, I'm Sharon. This fits into this somewhat, but I wanted to share this with you. Before I came to church today, I was listening to a pastor from Aberdeen, and he was talking about how bringing people to Jesus and to church, and that people want to wait until they're not broken, until they're sinless to come to church, because they don't want to come when they feel bad about themselves. But he said even God waited till after He caught the fish to clean them. And I thought that was really cool. Come to church when you're broken and when you need God, and He'll clean you after you get here.
Thanks, Sharon.
Hi, I'm Melissa.
Hey, Melissa.
Hi. God's been changing my attitude about life, and showing me that it's not about what I have done or what I'm going to do. It's about what I'm doing right now.
Amen. Very good.
Hi, I'm Jan. And God has really been showing me lately that my peace, my peace is not in the circumstances, is not in if I get through this next thing. Because last several years, it's kind of always been about if I just need to get through this next thing. It's about finding the peace in Him, like Paul talks about peace in all circumstances, is in Him and in relationship with Him. Because you know what? There's always a next thing. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jane.
Hey, Jane.
And thanks. I have recently, more than ever, it just means a lot to me to accept things as they are. And there's a lot behind that, but
Of
just to
course there
accept
is.
things as they are and deal with the present.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Anybody else? We could do one more.
Hi, I'm Jerry.
Hi, Hi, Jerry.
God's been teaching me about grace. First of all, the grace that He has for us, and then the power that He gives us to extend that to others. We're never too far or too far gone, and even if somebody really disappoints us, He reminds me how often I've disappointed Him.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, guys, for your help. Sometimes we need to be able to laugh at ourselves. I came across this, a pastor friend, a pastor wrote, my pastor friend put a sanitary hot air hand dryer in the restrooms at his church, and after 2 weeks he took them out. I asked him why, and he confessed that they worked fine, but when he went to use them, there was a sign written on them, "For a sample of last week's sermon, push the button." Another pastor wrote, after church service, a little boy told him, "When I grow up, I'm going to give you some money." "Well, thank you," the pastor replied, "but why?" "Because my daddy says you're the poorest preacher we've ever had." If you can indulge me for a moment, it's interesting, usually when I am preparing for a Sunday morning message, that I usually have great clarity as to what I'm supposed to share. And I usually map out weeks and sometimes months in advance, kind of a general direction that I will be going. And so when the week gets here, I work all week to pull together a message on a predetermined topic. Well, this week has been real different for me. And for some reason, as I've thought about this time that we are sharing together this morning, I've had an uneasiness all week. And I've done a lot of reflecting, not only on what I'm supposed to share, but why I'm feeling so uneasy about it today. And I know that some of you think that I just get here and I wing it every Sunday morning. And I just want to tell you, you have no idea. And others might assume that I go out and I find a canned message, like a can of Spam, and open it up and share it. But that's not what I do. And I actually take this time very seriously. You come every Sunday and you give me, about a half hour of your time. That's a lot of time. And the Bible teaches that when I share and when we share together, that God works in that. And so I want us to wrestle with real faith and life issues. And so when I get a week like this, where it's just kind of feeling odd, I'm learning how to handle it differently. When my predetermined kind of direction isn't where it seems like I'm supposed to be going, I've learned to kind of look inside of myself and search for what it is that God might be doing. And I got to tell you that hasn't come easily. I've partially learned how to do that through hundreds of dollars spent on therapy. And so, it hasn't been an easy little journey to get here. But I am learning to step back and go with what's going on inside. You ever feel that way? Like maybe just step back and go with what's going on inside. To ask God if He's leading me in a direction that I hadn't necessarily been prepared for. And so I've been kind of wrestling with God as to what to share, knowing that I wanted to share some things about gratitude and stewardship. And so I've had all of these things swimming in my head for this last week. I mean, I could give you a long list. I mean, everything from the election, to family things, to jobs, to work, to people that I'm encountering in my time here, to chairs and to floors, and a million things kind of going on in my head all the time, which maybe is why I was unsettled. And it occurred to me as I've been wrestling with that reality this week, that's your life. I mean, sometimes, the obvious should be more obvious than it is. It just occurred to me that's your life. That you come here on Sunday morning with a million things going on in your head. Whether it be work or family strife or paying the bills or, responsibilities that you have, things that you want, things that you need, fears, all of these life issues going on all at the same time. And then, it kind of explains why half the time you have a very blank stare while you're sitting there trying to make it look like you're listening to me. And so I just kind of want to talk about that a little bit and about how my week kind of has shaped what God's doing in my life. So if you hadn't heard, there was this election this week. It's now over. I've encountered people who are in panic mode, and I've encountered others who were gloating. And I stayed up very late on Tuesday night because I've always been interested in politics, and I watched the results. I stayed up far later than I should. It was very easy to get caught up in it. And as I was watching it, I couldn't help but think a little bit about the people that I was kind of encountering in my daily life lately. And I'm watching this big thing going on, this election that people have strong passions about. Most people have strong passions about. And I thought about some of the people that I've encountered week in and week out in my ministry at the Lighthouse, and I suspected at about 1 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday morning, it occurred to me that I bet some of the people that I'm ministering to don't even realize that there's an election today. That it was just Tuesday. And it was another day to try to survive. It's another day to just get through. To stay sober, to stay clean, or to find a place to rest, to sleep at night, or to eat. And I just had this overwhelming sense that, my goodness, here I and so many people, we're all swept up in this thing, and yet life continues, doesn't it? Life kind of continues, the way it is. And so I kind of went through a little bit of a prayer list of some of the people that I was thinking of that night or early that morning. So I stay up until about 1 o'clock in the morning. This is for a guy who's usually in bed around 9:30 during the week, if I'm home by then. And, I get swept up in this big political thing. I turn the news on in the morning when I get up. And then on Wednesday night, that same day when the results have been coming in, that same day I go to the church. And then in the evening, I walk 2 blocks that direction to Bolger Funeral Home, where I do a prayer service / little funeral for someone from AA who did not have a church home. And I'm thinking, what an interesting contrast, between all of these world events that everybody's caught up in, and this family who is grieving their loved one. And it was actually an interesting night. I don't know if this person had any faith background or perspective. Not even sure about the family members who were all gathered there, but it was very cool because I saw that in the midst of the time there, God was doing some pretty cool things. And I kind of watched as it seemed like there was some healing going on amongst family. Some of you have been in those circumstances. You know what I'm talking about. And, there was some good memories being shared and maybe some reassessing of values and priorities. And I didn't do that much. I said a couple of prayers, I read a couple of scripture passages, and then I told them about the God who loved them more than they could know. And I had this sense that, sometimes it's so easy this is kind of what God's been doing in my life lately, in my attitude, in my perspective. So easy for me to get caught up in such big things, and I miss what's right here. You ever feel that way? I was thinking this week about how our faith family is growing. Lighthouse Church last Sunday had about 160 people here. That's that's a pretty small church compared to some churches in town here. It's twice as big as we were a year ago. And I think we have about 160 here today. If we kept growing at that rate, that means there'd be 320 people here a year from now. That's a huge change in a church family. There was a small group of 10, 12 people who started Celebrate Recovery in our church a little over a year ago. And on Thursday night this week, there were 70 people here at Celebrate Recovery. 70 people at Celebrate Recovery. And so I was kind of thinking about all, election, all these things, and chairs and all of this stuff. And I was thinking about the growth of the church and how it can sometimes for me feel hard to keep up, and so many people and so many things happening. And I was just reminded that this week that just Dale, it's just about one person at a time. It was just really kind of a reality check. So I thought a little bit about that, and I just thought I'd tell you, this week I got to sit down with a little couple who were here just for a few minutes and have a little visit about the church. They're kind of an interesting couple. They've been coming just for a few weeks. No church background at all. No church background at all. She had a little bit of a vague kind of Mormon connection growing up, which isn't always a positive thing if you're not really invested in that community. And so, somebody had invited them, and we were talking about their life a little bit, and I just asked, what's it been like? And it was just kind of cool, because they just said, yeah, something's happening. It's kind of weird. Something's going on in our life, and we just really like it here. I was reminded it's really just about one person at a time. I happened to do Celebrate Recovery 101, which is kind of an introduction to Celebrate Recovery for the new people this last week. Sitting at a table in the basement, there were 5 guys from Center. Center is the transitional unit between jail and the community, and they've been coming in quite numbers to Celebrate Recovery. And I had 5 guys sitting around. One had a little bit of a church background. 2 guys, they were honest. I love the honesty in this place. 2 of them said, well, I came for the food and I was going to leave. And then they said, but I'm glad I stayed. Glad I stayed. And, one of them said, I realized that I need to try something different in life. And I remember that feeling. Anybody here remember that feeling? I realized I need to try something different. What I've been doing hasn't been working. And so they stayed, and they may never be back. But, our job is just to love them like Jesus would love them and minister to them when they're here, and let God do the rest. It's just about one person at a time. I went over to Center for a visit this week to a young lady, and who's been coming here for a little bit longer, for maybe a few months, and just a delightful, beautiful young woman who knows that God is doing something in her life. And it was really a nice visit. It was a very nice visit. And it's funny how your heart begins to kind of, get attached to people that 3 months ago you never had met before. And I didn't say anything that wise, but I listened, and we prayed a little bit, and it was just good. It reminded me that it's all about one. Isn't that true? It's all just about one person. And those were just a few of the conversations of very many this week. I'm thinking about Paul. Paul, some of you have gotten to know Paul. If you're here in the evening, you've met Paul. because Paul's here every evening. Paul lives in South Fargo, down by the Bowler, south of Kmart, walks downtown pretty much every night. And he comes to the church and sees what's going on. Usually he usually asks, where's the food first? And then he asks what's going on. He's been just an interesting guy to get to know. I mean, talk about an incredible, rich history of faith and recovery, but you don't always see it in Paul. And 2 nights this week, because if he's here and I'm last to leave and he's here, I drive him home. 2 nights between 9 and 10 o'clock. Actually, it was more between 10:30 and 11 the second night, I think. I drove him home. And the second night, he was choked up and emotional. And he said, you don't know what the acceptance of this community means to me every day. And he got out of the car. God, he had emotions sometimes. He got out of the car, and I said, God, forgive me for my lack of patience and my judgments that I make sometimes. You ever feel that way? And I kind of watched him walk off. God's heart, God is changing my heart. He's changing the way that I look at things and the way I look at people. And it occurred to me this week that God is in the heart-changing, life-changing business, and I get to participate. How cool is that? That God is in the heart-changing and life-changing business, and you get to participate in that. So I was trying to think about all these, incredibly instructive things to say about stewardship. And what I heard God telling me to say is, tell him it's a matter of the heart. If your heart's not in the right place, it doesn't matter what we learn about money and giving and managing the things in our life, even our time or our talents. It's all about a heart. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Bible says a lot about possessions and debt and spending and saving and giving, and it just says a lot about those things. But I'm learning to get up each day and see the day as a day with God. Not as a service to God, not as a giving back to God, but I'm learning to get up each day, a little bit more all the time, learning to get up in the morning and know that I have another adventure with God today. That's what God's doing in my life. I'd like you to turn with me to Romans chapter 12, 944 in our church Bibles. Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12, page 944. And, we had an Alpha retreat this weekend, so there were people here Friday night and Saturday morning doing the Alpha course. And the speaker actually, it was kind of funny because I've been working with these verses a little bit this week, and the speaker spoke on them yesterday. Group I was in discussed them, and I was thinking, God again, shows up. And so I want to share this whole sense of what God's doing in my life, that I'm beginning to see the day differently. Verse 1, and so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. And so we offer ourselves to God as a form of worship. We worship God when we come here. We sing, and all of what we do here might be part of worship. But when you get up tomorrow morning, you're engaged in a day of worship if you're ready and willing. When you get up on Thursday morning and you go to work or go to school or wherever it is that you're going, you're involved in an act of worship as don't just kind of give back to God, but you get up and you're gonna say, God, this is my act of worship because I'm going to do today with you. I'm going to do today with you. Verse 2, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think, and then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Stewardship for me in many ways used to be about giving back to God. And now it's about doing life with God, because God owns me. God owns everything I am and everything I have. God owns me, my time, my possessions, my money, my family, all of that stuff. And so now, instead of like giving back, to me, my stewardship has become, I'm doing life with God. So whatever He wants, we're going to do it together. And it's really been interesting. I told you I have a spiritual gift, I believe, of stewardship. I love to give. I've really grown in my giving and my generosity. It's really easy for me to give to the ministry of Lighthouse. Really easy for me because of what I see God doing. I love to give more sometimes than I even do because of what God is doing. And I'm learning to see people differently as Jesus sees them. How can I say, this is Isaiah 58, how can I say that I worship God and not participate in what He's doing in the world? I'm learning to see that every encounter that I have with people is not just a coincidence, but maybe a moment that has been created by God. That's a cool experience. I've been reading a new book, not a new book, an old book that is new to me. Somebody gave it to me, called the Genesee Diary, written by Henry Nouwen. Some of you might know the name Henry Nouwen. He's a Catholic priest, writes a lot on servanthood and a servant's heart. And he has this amazing book where he decided that he was going to join a monastery for 7 months. So he went to be a monk for 7 months and do the monastery life. He goes in and he tries to do everything that monks do. And the book is a diary of his 7 months. And it's really interesting. For example, he writes, here's the books that I brought along with me. He writes, I brought along the Spanish Bible, the works of St. John the Cross, a history of the United States, and a novel, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Has anybody ever read that book? We had a few at the first service. Have you? I'm going to. Listen to this. During the day, I often thought about a passage in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, where Pirsig makes a distinction between ego climbing and selfless climbing. It seems a very important passage for me, worthwhile quoting here, trying to explain why his 11-year-old son, Chris, is not enjoying a camping trip to the ridge of the canyon. Pirsig writes, to the untrained eye, ego climbing is selfless climbing, or ego climbing and selfless climbing may appear identical. Both kinds of climbers place one foot in front of the other, both breathe in and out at the same time, both stop when tired, both go forward when rested. But what a difference. The ego climber is like an instrument that's out of adjustment. He puts his foot down an instant too soon or too late. He's likely to miss a beautiful passage of sunlight through the trees. He goes on when the sloppiness of his steps shows he's tired. He rests at odd times. He looks up the trail to see what's ahead even when he knows what's ahead because he just looked a second before. He goes too fast or too slow for the conditions. And when he talks, his talk is forever about somewhere else and something else. He's here, but he's not here. You ever feel that way? He rejects the here, is unhappy with it. He wants to be further up the trail. But when he gets there, he will be just as unhappy because then it will be here. What is he looking for? What he wants is all around him. But he doesn't want that because it's all around him. Every step's an effort, both physically and spiritually, because he's imagined his goal to be external and distant. Oh man, I read that and I thought, that's so much me. Million things going on in my head, a million things going on in your head. Elections and people and paying the bills and jobs and work. And, last week in church, we talked about anxiety, and I said that sometimes we get so anxious about the things that might happen that we miss what God is doing right in front of us today. That's what God is doing in my life. He's helping me to understand that He's engaged in the moment. We had this Alpha retreat this weekend, and we happened to have our grandson Jackson for Friday and Saturday, and I was hardly home at all. And he came to Grandma and Grandpa's, and we got a babysitter one night for him. And we had so much going on. And so I finally, after the Alpha retreat yesterday and working some in the afternoon, I got home late afternoon. And truth be told, I hadn't seen much of my grandson, and I really didn't necessarily want to when I got there. Besides, the Michigan game was on, which now I wish I had skipped, but that's another story. So I watched him, and obviously, did kind of normal grandpa and grandson stuff, but mostly I watched him and Grandma interact. He likes her better anyway. And as the night was wearing on, he was getting a little wound up, and so I said, why don't we go outside for a little bit and check the mail? And we went outside and got a little fresh air. And I said, why don't we walk to the end of the block? Well, you don't tell a 3-year-old to walk to the end of the block. Instead, what you do is you walk and you watch him sprint to the end of the block. And I saw that, and I knew what I was going to share with you this morning, and I couldn't help but think, that's what I don't want to do anymore. I've done that so much in my life, where I've sprinted to the end of the block that I've missed the sidewalk right here around me, and I've missed what God is doing right here around me. That's what God is doing in my life. I think sometimes we miss so much. To be a steward of what God has given us is to be living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, to be involved in what God is doing today, knowing that yesterday is gone, tomorrow is not promised, but I can enjoy and experience and serve and live life with God in this moment, that I have that choice. And so, my prayer for you as you kind of go out from this place today, from this hodgepodge of stuff that I shared, is that maybe you can take something that will increase your gratitude and maybe even improve your stewardship, but mostly your heart this coming week. Action plan, 3 things. Start working on a gratitude list and bring it on Wednesday night of Thanksgiving Eve. Get a notebook, start writing down the things you're grateful for. Number 2, what new thing is God doing in you? I've shared with you what God's doing in my attitude. Some of you shared, what's God doing to help you see life differently right now? And then number 3, and some of you need to hear this the most, and you need to do some thinking and planning for this week. How can I be more in the moment this week? Let's live in this week. How can I be more in the moment this week? All right, let's stand and sing close.